Sir, guests don't wander in from the street. The words landed sharper than the cold rain still clinging to Marcus Ellington's coat. He stopped 3 steps inside the lobby of the Halston Grand, water dripping quietly from the hem of his jacket onto a floor so polished it looked like black glass. The place glowed with money. Brass light fixtures shimmered against cream-colored marble. A chandelier spilled warm gold across the ceiling. Somewhere behind the quiet piano music, ice clinked in crystal and a suitcase wheel whispered across stone. Marcus stood there with one worn leather bag in his hand, rain on his shoulders, and the steady posture of a man who had spent his whole life learning how not to flinch when a room decided what he was worth before he ever opened his mouth. Behind the front desk, Ethan Caldwell straightened his tailored navy suit and gave Marcus the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. It was the smile of a man who believed he could recognize belonging on sight. Marcus looked like the exact kind of guest Ethan thought didn't fit the picture. His coat was old, though clean. His shoes were wet from walking half a block in the storm. He had no driver at the curb, no assistant trailing behind him, no expensive watch raised carelessly into view. Just a quiet face, tired from travel, and a gaze that moved once across the lobby as if he were noticing details other people missed. "I have a reservation," Marcus said, calm enough to make Ethan's expression tighten. His voice was low, warm, controlled. Not defensive, not apologetic. He stepped toward the desk and placed one hand lightly on the edge of the marble counter. It was cold enough to feel through his skin. "Name?" Ethan asked, though the question sounded less like hospitality and more like a challenge. "Ellington. Marcus Ellington." For one brief second, the young receptionist beside Ethan glanced down at her screen and froze. Her name tag read Naomi Brooks. Marcus saw the flicker in her face, the tiny shift of recognition, the hesitation just before she spoke. "Sir, I think that won't be necessary," Ethan cut in smoothly, never taking his eyes off Marcus. The piano music kept playing. Somewhere near the bar, someone laughed too loudly, then quieted. Marcus could feel the attention beginning to gather the way static gathers before a storm. Ethan leaned forward a fraction. "Mr. Ellington, this property is private. If you're here to meet someone, you can wait outside until they come down." Marcus blinked once. Rainwater slipped from his sleeve to the floor between them. "I'm not here to wait outside," he said. "I'm checking in." Naomi swallowed. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Ethan's jaw hardened. To him, Marcus's calm wasn't dignity. It was resistance. And resistance, in a place like this, was something men like Ethan took personally. "Sir," he said, louder now, enough for nearby guests to hear. "I'm going to ask you one more time to step away from the desk." A few heads turned. A woman near the elevators paused mid-step. A man in a camel hair overcoat looked up from his phone. Marcus did not move. He only lifted his eyes fully to Ethan's face, and there was nothing hostile in them, nothing loud, nothing reckless. Just a stillness that made Ethan feel, for reasons he could not explain, slightly less certain of the room he controlled. Then Ethan reached for the phone at the desk. "Security," he said, voice clipped and crisp. "And call CPD. We have a situation in the lobby." The chandelier light trembled across the marble. Naomi looked at Marcus as if she wanted to say something, anything, but the moment had already tipped past warning and into humiliation. Marcus lowered his gaze for half a second, not in defeat but in patience, as if he had seen this exact scene before in 100 different forms. Then he set his old leather bag upright beside his leg, looked once toward the private elevator at the far end of the lobby, and waited. The call had already changed the temperature of the room. Nothing visible had moved, not really. The chandelier still glowed. The piano still wandered softly through the lobby from hidden speakers above the bar. Rain still traced silver lines down the tall front windows facing Michigan Avenue. But after Ethan Caldwell asked for security and the police, every breath in the room seemed to wait for permission. Marcus Ellington stood beside his weather-darkened leather bag without shifting his weight. He did not look at the guests pretending not to stare. He did not look at the mirrored columns or the velvet chairs arranged with exact, expensive symmetry near the fireplace. He looked at the front desk, at the young receptionist whose fingers still hovered above the keyboard, and then past her, at the wall clock mounted behind the concierge station. 8:17. He noted it the way some men note exits and others note weather. Naomi Brooks could not have been more than 26. Her hair was pulled back neatly, and the tension in her shoulders made her look younger than she was. She glanced from her monitor to Marcus again, then to Ethan, then back to the monitor. She had seen the reservation. Marcus knew she had. He had caught that first flash of surprise in her eyes before Ethan cut her off. It was the look of someone who had stumbled onto a fact that did not fit the story being told out loud. Marcus had learned long ago that truth often entered a room that way, quietly and almost apologetically, before power shoved it aside. He rested his palm against the cold marble edge of the desk and let his eyes travel once through the lobby. A cracked seam, fine as a pencil line, ran up the base of the west column near the florist's stand. One of the recessed lights above the concierge counter flickered every fourth pulse. The brass luggage cart by the entrance had a wheel pulling slightly left. The emergency exit placard near the banquet hall corridor was mounted 2 inches too high. Tiny things. Easy things to miss if all a man ever noticed was a guest's shoes, a guest's skin, a guest's usefulness to the image of a place. Marcus noticed everything because places spoke, even when the people inside them lied. 3 decades earlier, his mother had worked nights in a hotel not much different from this one, steaming uniforms in a laundry room that smelled like starch, metal, and overheated pipes. She used to come home with her hands dry from detergent and say the same thing every time somebody important had passed her in silence. They love the shine, baby. They just do not want to know who keeps it shining. Marcus had never forgotten that. It was why he traveled alone when he could. Why he checked in under his own name without calling ahead. Why he listened more than he spoke. Men like Ethan always thought power announced itself. In Marcus's experience, real power usually entered quietly and let everybody else reveal themselves first. Near the lounge, a couple in evening clothes lowered their voices and looked over with careful discomfort. A bellman paused with a garment bag over one arm, sensing tension but not yet understanding its shape. Ethan, meanwhile, had settled into the firm, polished confidence of a man certain that procedure would protect him. He adjusted his cuffs, squared the registration cards on the desk into a perfect stack, and stood with the satisfied stillness of someone who believed he was preserving order. "You are making this harder than it needs to be," he said at last. His tone was almost gentle now, which made it colder. "If there has been some confusion, we can clear it up once officers arrive." Marcus turned his face toward him. "There is no confusion," he said. Ethan held the smile for another second, but something under it thinned. Naomi swallowed and lowered her voice. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, very carefully, "the reservation is real." Ethan did not even look at her. "Naomi, step away from the screen." The words were not loud, but they carried the kind of pressure that made young employees obey before they had time to think. Marcus watched her hands retreat from the keyboard, watched the hurt rise in her face and get folded away behind professional stillness. That, too, he recognized. Not just fear. Training. The expensive discipline of swallowing what you know because someone with a better suit says not to know it. He lifted his hand from the counter and brushed a drop of rain from his cuff. His voice stayed level. "You may want to read the company line attached to that reservation." For the first time, Ethan looked directly at the screen. Only for a moment. Only long enough for Marcus to see the faintest interruption in his certainty before Ethan locked his face back into place. "Security is on the way," Ethan said. "And I think that is best for everyone." Marcus let the silence sit between them. The piano music drifted into a slower phrase. Somewhere above, behind closed private doors and tinted glass, the upper floors of the Halston Grand waited under the warm hush of premium suites and executive meeting rooms. Marcus looked once toward the private elevator at the far end of the lobby, then back at Ethan. There was no anger in his expression now, only patience, and something far worse for a man like Ethan to stand in front of. Recognition. The first sign of movement came not from the front doors, but from the corridor behind the concierge desk, where a uniformed security officer appeared with quick, controlled steps and an expression already arranged for trouble. He was broad-shouldered, middle-aged, and careful in the way men become careful after years of being asked to step into other people's tension without making it worse. His name tag read Raymond Pike. He slowed when he saw Marcus standing still beside the marble counter, rain drying on his coat, one hand resting lightly on the handle of his leather bag. Then Raymond looked at Ethan Caldwell, and the question in his eyes was simple. Ethan answered it with the confidence of a man who had never doubted his own version of events for more than a second. "This gentleman refuses to leave the desk area," Ethan said. "He claims to have access to a reservation, but he has not provided valid confirmation, and he is disrupting operations." Marcus noticed the order of the sentence. Not the facts. The framing. It was always the framing. A person could turn dignity into defiance just by changing where the emphasis fell. Raymond gave Marcus a professional nod. "Sir, I am going to ask you to step with me to the seating area while we sort this out." His voice was calm, almost kind. Marcus appreciated that. He nodded once, but did not move yet. "I am not refusing cooperation," he said. "I am waiting for your manager to read the full reservation notes attached to my check-in." Naomi lowered her eyes, and for a second Marcus could almost hear the truth pressing against her silence. Ethan folded his hands in front of him. "The matter is already being handled." The rain tapped softly against the windows. Outside, headlights smeared white and red across the wet street. Inside, the lobby air carried lemon polish, expensive perfume, and the faint bitter scent of coffee cooling in porcelain somewhere near the bar. Marcus took in the room again, not because he needed to, but because habit had made observation its own kind of discipline. The floral arrangement near the east entrance was overwatered. The welcome display for the evening event had one corner peeling away from the easel. A porter, too new to hide it, was pretending to polish brass while listening with his whole body. Every place had a truth beneath the presentation. Tonight, the Halston Grand was telling the truth in reflections, glances, and trembling voices. "What exactly is the disruption?" Marcus asked. Ethan looked almost relieved to hear him speak again, as if conversation itself offered one more chance to force the story back under control. "You entered the property without the appearance or documentation of a registered guest," he said. "You ignored staff instructions, challenged hotel procedure, and created discomfort for those around you." The words hung there in the warm light, polished and rehearsed. Marcus let them settle. He noticed the couple near the lounge look away too quickly. Discomfort. Such a clean word. Such a useful word. It covered so much. Naomi finally gathered enough courage to speak, though she kept her voice low. "Mr. Caldwell, his suite is assigned on the executive floor." Ethan turned to her then, and the smile he gave her was the kind used to punish without raising volume. "Naomi, I need you to stop improvising." Her face flushed, then emptied. Marcus felt something in his chest tighten, not from fear, but from recognition. He had seen that look before in conference rooms, restaurants, car dealerships, airports, banks. The moment a younger employee tells the truth and learns truth is only welcome when it flatters power. Raymond shifted slightly, no longer quite as certain as he had been when he arrived. "Sir," he said to Marcus, "do you have identification?" Marcus met his gaze and nodded. "I do." He reached slowly into the inside pocket of his coat and took out a slim leather wallet darkened at the edges from years of use. Not flashy. No gold trim. No thick stack of cards announcing status before character. He opened it and removed a driver's license, then a black access card in an unmarked sleeve, and finally a folded photo worn soft at the corners. He handed the license to Raymond first. The security officer studied it, then glanced at Ethan, then at the screen Naomi was no longer allowed to touch. "It matches the reservation name," Raymond said carefully. Ethan did not blink. Names can be copied. Marcus unfolded the photograph with deliberate care. It showed an old hotel lobby from another era, smaller and less refined, with bronze lamps and patterned carpet, and a young black woman in housekeeping whites standing beside a service cart, smiling into the camera with tired eyes and proud shoulders. Marcus held it for only a second before returning it to his wallet. Raymond noticed. Naomi noticed. Ethan did not ask. Men like Ethan rarely asked about the history of people they had already decided to reduce. Marcus slipped the wallet back into his coat. "My mother worked in hotels," he said. "She taught me that the first thing a place reveals is not how it welcomes power. It is how it treats a person before power is recognized." The sentence landed differently than anger would have. It was not loud. It did not plead. It did not perform hurt for the comfort of witnesses. It simply told the truth and left it there, clean and impossible to improve. For the first time since Marcus had walked in, Ethan's expression changed in a way so small most people would have missed it. Not shame. Not yet. just the faint irritation of a man who could feel control slipping, not because somebody challenged him, but because somebody refused to be shaped by him. Then from somewhere beyond the private elevator doors came the soft mechanical hum of descent, and Naomi's head turned toward the sound before anyone else in the lobby understood why. The private elevator chimed so softly most people would have missed it, but in the strained quiet of the lobby the sound cut through everything. Naomi turned first, then Raymond, then Marcus, though his expression did not change. Ethan followed their gaze a half-second later, annoyance already sharpening his features as the brushed steel doors slid apart and spilled a rectangle of warmer light across the marble floor. A man stepped out quickly, holding a tablet in one hand and a pair of reading glasses in the other. He wore the kind of dark suit that belonged less to hospitality than to boardrooms and quarterly reports. His silver tie was loosened as if the evening had already gone longer than planned, and his eyes moved with the fast, scanning intelligence of someone used to solving problems before they became public. The moment he saw Marcus standing at the front desk with security beside him, the color drained from his face so visibly that even the guests near the lounge stopped pretending not to watch. "Mr. Ellington," he said, breath catching on the name. He crossed the distance between the elevator and the front desk with a speed that made his polished shoes click sharply against the stone. "I am so sorry. We have been waiting upstairs." The words did not rise. They dropped, heavy and exact, into the center of the room. Ethan did not move. For one strange second, he looked not embarrassed, not yet afraid, but confused in the deepest way a man can be confused when the world refuses to follow the script he had already written for it. "David," he said, trying to recover his posture, "there has been a misunderstanding." David Whitmore, Regional Chief Operating Officer for the Midwest Division, did not even look at him at first. His attention stayed fixed on Marcus with the careful respect of a man who understood how much damage had already been done in public and how little language could repair in private. "Sir," David said, voice low, "the board members are assembled in the executive salon. They thought your delayed arrival was weather-related." Marcus regarded him for a moment, then glanced toward the rain streaking down the front windows. "In a way," he said, "it was." Naomi lowered her eyes to hide the flicker of vindication that crossed her face. Raymond Pike took one slow step back, not out of fear, but out of sudden clarity. His body language changed in an instant from intervention to witness. Ethan, however, still seemed to be fighting for a version of reality that would leave him standing where he was. "You did not inform the desk," he said, forcing calm into his voice, "that this guest was part of the executive review." David turned to him then, and the shift in his expression was colder than anger. "This guest," he said carefully, "is Marcus Ellington." The sentence should have been enough. It was not. Ethan blinked once, twice, and something stubborn in him still refused to connect the name to the building around him. Marcus saw it happen and felt no satisfaction in it, only a tired familiarity. Some people needed truth repeated because they had spent so long filtering the world through class, race, and appearance that the obvious could stand 3 feet away and still fail to register. David lifted the tablet in his hand and touched the screen. Across the lobby, mounted above the corridor leading to the ballroom, a digital welcome display flickered from the generic event schedule into a custom slide prepared for the evening meeting. The black screen brightened. White serif letters came into focus beneath the gold crest of the company. Ellington Hospitality Group. Founders Review Night. For the first time since Marcus had entered the building, Ethan Caldwell lost command of his face completely. The practiced authority fell away from him in layers. His mouth parted slightly. His shoulders loosened, as if some invisible structure inside him had been kicked out all at once. He turned toward the screen, then back toward Marcus, then toward Naomi's terminal, as though a different angle might rescue him from what had just become undeniable. "No," he said softly, though he did not seem to be speaking to anyone. "No, that is not possible." But it was possible. It was standing in front of him in an old rain-dark coat and watermarked shoes, carrying a worn leather bag instead of a performance of wealth. Marcus did not raise his voice. He did not straighten his back to seem taller. He did not reach for the moment and make it theatrical. He simply stood where Ethan had left him and let the truth finish arriving on its own. Outside, a bus rolled past on the wet avenue, sending a wash of reflected headlights through the glass. Inside, The chandelier light glowed against brass and marble and stunned silence. Ethan looked at David as if pleading for some smaller explanation, some version that would preserve him. "You said the founder was joining virtually," he whispered. David's jaw tightened. "I said Mr. Ellington had not finalized how he would attend." Naomi's hand moved to her mouth. Raymond glanced at the desk phone that had summoned the police and then back at Ethan, understanding the full shape of the mistake now. Marcus let his eyes rest on the welcome screen for one brief second before returning to Ethan. "You were right about one thing," he said. His voice was even, almost gentle, and that gentleness made Ethan look worse, not better. "This property is private." The words were not cruel. They were exact. Ethan's face drained another shade paler. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "Mr. Ellington, I did not realize." Marcus lifted one hand slightly, not to silence him with power, but to stop him from reaching too quickly for the easiest excuse in the room. Realization was not the point. That was what men like Ethan never understood until it was too late. The problem was never what they did after learning who someone was. The problem was what they did before. The silence after Marcus spoke did not feel empty. It felt expensive. It spread across the lobby like a sheet of glass, thin and sharp, holding everyone in place under the chandelier light. Ethan Caldwell stood behind the front desk with one hand still resting near the phone he had used only minutes earlier, as if the shape of his mistake had not fully reached his fingers yet. The polished confidence he wore so easily before was gone now, but what replaced it was not humility. Not yet. It was the frantic, inward scramble of a man trying to outrun the moral meaning of his own actions. "Mr. Ellington," he said again, and this time the title sounded less like respect than panic dressed for a boardroom. "I sincerely apologize if there has been any misunderstanding in the way this interaction unfolded." Marcus heard David Whitmore inhale softly through his nose. Naomi looked down at the desk. Raymond Pike folded his hands in front of him and stared at a point just beyond Ethan's shoulder, the way decent people do when they know they are about to witness someone choose between honesty and self-preservation. Marcus did not answer right away. He let the sentence remain where Ethan had placed it. Misunderstanding. Interaction. Unfolded. Every polished word doing its best to blur what had happened beneath it. The rain outside grew steadier, ticking against the tall glass in fine cold threads. A taxi stopped at the curb, headlights bending across the wet stone at the entrance before sliding away again. Somewhere behind the bar, a coffee cup touched a saucer with a small, clear click. The hotel had resumed breathing, but shallowly. Marcus looked at Ethan the way he looked at everything else in a property under review, without haste and without illusion. "You called the police on a black guest who had a valid reservation," he said. His voice remained low, and because it remained low, every word landed harder. "That is not a misunderstanding. That is a decision." Ethan's face tightened as if the sentence had found the one place he could not buffer with language. "Sir, I was acting according to protocol." The excuse arrived almost automatically, and Marcus felt the old familiar heaviness of hearing injustice explained by policy. "Protocol," Marcus repeated softly, not to mock the word, but to weigh it in the air where everyone could hear how thin it was. "Show me the protocol that begins with appearance and ends with a police call before a reservation is fully reviewed." Ethan opened his mouth, but nothing came. Naomi's eyes lifted for a second, just enough for Marcus to see relief flicker through them. Not because he was humiliating her manager. Because someone had finally spoken in plain language inside a room built to bury plain truths under expensive carpet. David Whitmore stepped closer to the desk, his voice now clipped with executive restraint. "Ethan, I need the lobby incident report, the desk log, and the camera feed from the last 30 minutes preserved immediately." Ethan turned toward him as though the words themselves were a kind of betrayal. "David, surely we can discuss this privately." Marcus watched that, too. The instinct to hide. The sudden longing for doors, offices, side conversations, any small protected room where consequences could be negotiated back into something survivable. "No," Marcus said before David could answer. This happened publicly. The sentence settled into the marble and brass and velvet around them. It carried no anger, yet it left no path around itself. Ethan's throat moved. For the first time, there was a trace of real shame in his eyes, but it was mixed with something weaker and smaller, the fear of being seen as the man he had already proven himself to be. He glanced toward the guests who had witnessed the scene, then toward Naomi, then at Raymond, whose silence now felt less like support and more like testimony. "I was trying to protect the hotel," Ethan said, and even he seemed to hear how fragile that sounded. Marcus let his gaze drift once across the lobby, over the cream marble columns, the brass luggage cart, the velvet seating, the careful glow of a brand designed to feel effortless. Then he looked back at Ethan. "People like you always say that," he replied. "You say you are protecting the hotel, the neighborhood, the guests, the atmosphere, the standard. But what you are usually protecting is your own comfort with who you think belongs in front of you." No one moved. Naomi's lips parted slightly. Raymond lowered his eyes. David Whitmore took off his glasses and held them in one hand, as if even he needed a second to absorb the precision of what had just been said. Ethan looked as if he wanted to deny it, but denial requires ground, and he no longer had any. Marcus reached down and picked up his weathered leather bag. The motion was simple, almost quiet, yet every eye in the lobby followed it. "You still have not asked the only question that matters," he said. Ethan blinked, lost. "What question?" Marcus's face did not harden. It saddened, almost imperceptibly, and that sadness carried more judgment than anger ever could. "How many people came through this lobby before me," he said, "and left believing this company saw them the way you did?" The question changed the room. It moved the center of the moment away from Marcus's status and back to something Ethan could not defend himself from. The possibility that this was not one bad call, not one awkward scene, not one unfortunate lapse under pressure, but part of a pattern so ordinary to him, he had performed it in front of witnesses without even recognizing it as cruelty. Ethan's shoulders lowered a fraction. The fight in his face dimmed. Behind him, the computer screen still held Marcus's reservation details in neat, clean lines, proof that the truth had been sitting there the entire time, waiting for someone to value fact more than instinct. David finally spoke, and now there was no softness left in his voice. "Mr. Ellington did not come here only for the board meeting, Ethan." Ethan looked up slowly. David met his eyes with the flat steadiness of a man delivering irreversible news. "He has been reviewing guest complaints, employee reports, and discrimination claims across multiple properties for the last 6 weeks." The words seemed to cool the whole lobby by 10 degrees. Naomi went perfectly still. Raymond's head turned toward Marcus with a new understanding. Ethan stared, unable to process all of it at once. Marcus held his gaze and said nothing. He did not need to. The truth had finally reached the place where excuses stopped working. And in the polished quiet of the Halston, grand, with rain on the windows and the company crest glowing above the ballroom corridor, Ethan Caldwell began to understand that he had not simply embarrassed himself in front of the owner. He had just become evidence. The words hung in the lobby long after David Whitmore said them. Not because they were loud, because they were true in the kind of way that made every polished surface in the room feel suddenly less decorative and more like a witness. Marcus Ellington stood with his leather bag in one hand and the rain drying slowly along the shoulders of his coat. He did not look triumphant. That was what unsettled Naomi Brooks most. If she had been him, she thought, she might have wanted the satisfaction of watching Ethan Caldwell fall apart under the weight of his own arrogance. But Marcus did not seem interested in punishment as spectacle. He looked like a man who had seen too many versions of this moment in too many expensive rooms to mistake shock for change. Outside, the rain had deepened into a steady silver curtain, softening the city lights into long, blurred streaks on the glass. Inside, the air held still around the scent of polished wood, coffee, and fresh lilies from the arrangement beside the concierge stand. The piano music had shifted into something slower, almost thoughtful, and the notes moved through the lobby like they were trying not to disturb the truth already resting there. Ethan's hands were no longer steady. It was visible now in the way his fingertips touched the edge of the desk, then withdrew, then returned again as if he needed the marble to remind him where he was. He looked at Marcus, then at David, then at the glowing welcome display near the ballroom corridor, and each time his face seemed to lose another layer of certainty. 6 weeks, he repeated quietly, as though the number itself might change if he said it back. David did not answer immediately. He put his glasses back on, though the motion felt more like habit than need, then opened the tablet in his hand and scrolled with measured precision. Guest complaints, staff observations, anonymous reports, patterns across properties, check-in discrepancies, differential treatment, escalation bias. He listed them with the clipped rhythm of an executive who had spent too many nights reading things a company should have caught. Before they reached the owner's desk, Mr. Ellington chose to visit selected locations without advance notice because data tells you what happened. Presence tells you why. Naomi felt those words in her chest. Presence tells you why. She looked at Marcus again and understood something she had not fully understood before. He had not come to catch people in one dramatic mistake. He had come to see what surfaced when no one thought they were being watched by someone who mattered. Ethan swallowed. I have never discriminated against anyone, he said, but the sentence sounded thinner than he intended, like a coat too light for the weather. Marcus turned his eyes toward him, and for the first time that evening there was visible fatigue in them. Not weakness, not defeat, but the deep old weariness of a man asked too often to prove the reality of what he had just lived through. That is the easiest sentence in the world to say after the truth arrives, Marcus replied. His voice stayed gentle, almost soft enough to disappear into the music, and because of that softness, everyone leaned into it. The harder question is what you believed before you knew my name meant something to you. Ethan said nothing. Naomi watched his face as those words landed. Then, Marcus did not. He had not forgotten a single detail since he stepped through the doors. The cold rain on his face. The first look Ethan gave him. Naomi's interrupted warning. The desk phone in Ethan's hand. The careful language used to dress instinct up as procedure. None of it had left him. Have them canceled, David said sharply, finally turning to Ethan. Now. Ethan reached for the phone too quickly, almost knocking the receiver against the edge of the desk before catching it. That small, clumsy sound, plastic against marble, echoed more than it should have in the quiet. He pressed the line and spoke with a voice so different from the one he had used earlier that Naomi nearly closed her eyes. Gone was the crisp certainty, the command, the righteousness. What remained was a strained, formal request to disregard a call that should never have been made. When he hung up, the silence that followed felt even heavier than before. Marcus looked toward the tall windows. Rainwater drifted down the glass in long, uneven lines, bending the city into liquid gold and red beyond the lobby lights. For a second, he was not in Chicago at all. He was 12 years old again, sitting in the back seat of his mother's old sedan while she parked behind another hotel after sunset, changing into her housekeeping shoes before her shift because she did not want to wear them on the drive. He remembered her hands on the steering wheel, the steam from her coffee, the tired smile she gave him when he asked why people in beautiful places could act so ugly. She had stared through the windshield for a moment and said, "Beautiful places do not make beautiful people, baby. They just hide them better." Marcus returned to the room with that sentence still warm in memory. When he looked back at Ethan, the manager seemed smaller now, though nothing about his height had changed. It was his certainty that had collapsed, and certainty had been the largest thing about him. David stepped nearer and lowered his voice. "The board is waiting upstairs," he said. "We can move this conversation to the executive salon whenever you are ready." Marcus did not answer at once. He let his gaze rest on Naomi, who still stood behind the terminal Ethan had ordered her away from. Her shoulders were straight, but her eyes were bright with the effort of staying composed. Then he looked at Raymond, who had arrived expecting to remove a problem and was now standing in the presence of one far older and harder to escort out. Finally Marcus turned back to Ethan. "Not yet," he said. The words were calm, but they changed the room again. Because everyone understood that what came next would not be about embarrassment. It would be about whether anyone inside the Halston Grand had the courage to look directly at what had been revealed and call it by its real name. No one in the lobby moved after Marcus said it. Not yet. The rain kept tracing its patient lines down the glass, and the piano notes still drifted through the warm air, but the room itself felt suspended, as if even the light from the chandelier had slowed to listen. Ethan Caldwell stood behind the desk with the canceled police call still hanging over him like a stain no one could wipe clean. His face had lost that polished hospitality expression entirely now. What remained was rawer than embarrassment. It was exposure. The kind that leaves a man with nowhere to put his eyes because every direction holds a mirror. Marcus set his leather bag down beside his shoe and rested both hands lightly over the handle. You said you were protecting the hotel, he said, his tone even, almost reflective. So let us talk about what you believe this hotel is. Ethan swallowed and glanced toward David Whitmore, perhaps hoping for rescue, perhaps hoping the conversation could still be redirected upstairs, behind closed doors and controlled lighting and executive language. David did not intervene. Naomi did not look away. Raymond Pike remained still near the concierge stand, his posture now less like security and more like witness. Ethan drew a careful breath. This property represents a luxury standard, he said. Guests expect discretion, order, professionalism, and safety. Marcus nodded once, slowly, as if he had heard the script before. And when I walked through those doors, which part did you think I threatened? Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it. The question was too exact, too clean. It did not leave room for the old protective fog of corporate vocabulary. Marcus took a step closer to the desk, not aggressively, just enough to shorten the distance truth had. To travel. Was it my tone? He asked. I was calm. Was it my reservation? It was valid. Was it my behavior? I followed every instruction except the one that required me to disappear from a place I had every right to enter. Ethan's breathing changed. Naomi heard it before she fully understood it. The controlled rhythm was gone. In its place was the shallow effort of a man trying to think faster than his conscience. I made a judgment call, Ethan said finally, based on the circumstances. Marcus nodded again, but there was sadness in it now, not approval. Yes, he said. That is exactly what I am asking you to hear. The sentence seemed to strike harder than anything else Marcus had said all evening. A judgment call. The phrase sounded different now that it had been returned to its owner without polish. Naomi felt a chill move through her arms despite the warmth of the lobby. She thought about every time she had watched Ethan decide, within seconds, who deserved patience, who deserved suspicion, who got welcomed with ease, and who got measured before they got spoken to. Until this moment, those choices had always been small enough to hide inside routine. But small things repeat. Small things become culture. Small things become the air people breathe in a building until nobody remembers when it started smelling wrong. Marcus looked at the digital welcome screen still glowing near the ballroom corridor, the company crest shining above his family name, then back at Ethan. Do you know why I came in alone? He asked. Ethan gave the smallest shake of his head. Because power changes the room before character has a chance to reveal itself, Marcus said. If I had arrived with an escort, with an announcement, with a line of executives waiting at the curb, you would have smiled before I reached the desk. You would have offered me sparkling water. You would have called me sir with both hands visible and your shoulders relaxed. That is not respect. That is recognition of advantage. Ethan's eyes fell to the marble counter. The silence around him thickened. David Whitmore lowered his gaze for a moment, as if even he understood that what was happening now had moved beyond management failure and into something far more personal. Marcus continued, never raising his voice. Real hospitality begins before status is confirmed. Real character begins before there is anything to gain. That is what you missed tonight. Ethan's fingers tightened against the edge of the desk. I did not think, he said, and the words came out rougher than he intended. It was the first honest sentence he had spoken since Marcus entered the building. Marcus heard it and let it stand. Not because it excused anything, but because truth, when it finally arrived, deserved to be left undisturbed long enough for everyone to recognize it. Naomi felt her throat tighten unexpectedly, not from pity for Ethan, but from the shock of hearing someone in power stop hiding behind training and procedure and simply admit the most dangerous thing of all. I did not think. Marcus tilted his head slightly. No, he said. You did not. You reacted. And your reaction was shaped long before I walked through those doors. The words settled over the room like a final layer of light. Ethan did not argue. He could not. Somewhere near the entrance, the revolving door gave another slow hush as city air brushed briefly into the lobby and vanished again. Rain smell. Cold stone. The outside world reminding them it still existed beyond this shining room. Marcus glanced once toward Naomi. You saw the reservation, he said gently. She looked startled to be addressed, then nodded. Yes, sir, she said. Her voice trembled only once, and then steadied. I did. And you tried to speak. Naomi nodded again, eyes bright. Yes, sir. Marcus turned back to Ethan. That matters. Ethan closed his eyes for 1 second, no longer in denial now, but in the awful dawning awareness that the worst thing about the night was not that he had misidentified the owner. It was that he had silenced the one person who tried to stop him from becoming the thing the company had been investigating all along. When he opened his eyes again, there was no script left in them, only the first real glimpse of himself. For a long second, Ethan Caldwell did not look like a manager at all. He looked like a man standing in the wreckage of his own assumptions, trying to understand how something so invisible inside him had suddenly become visible to everyone else. The chandelier light caught the side of his face and made him seem older than he had an hour earlier. Not because time had passed, because pretense had. Marcus Ellington watched him without cruelty. That was the part Ethan seemed least prepared for. He knew how to respond to anger. He probably even knew how to defend himself against accusation. But mercy, quiet and steady and undeserved, left him nowhere to hide. The rain continued down the windows in silver ribbons, and somewhere near the lounge a coffee machine hissed before falling silent again. The whole hotel seemed to be listening. Ethan's voice, when it came, had lost the smooth finish it wore for donors and investors and guests who fit the image in his head. "I was wrong," he said. The words were simple, almost plain. No policy, no protocol, no misunderstanding. Just wrong. Naomi Brooks lowered her eyes, and Raymond Pike exhaled through his nose as if the room had finally reached the first honest moment of the night. David Whitmore did not interrupt. Marcus let Ethan stand in the truth of what he had said. He knew better than most that confession made under pressure was not the same as transformation. Still, honesty had to start somewhere, and sometimes it began in humiliation before it learned how to become humility. Ethan looked up again, but only barely. "I saw what I expected to see," he said. "And I acted on it before I gave you the dignity of being fully seen." The sentence surprised even him. Marcus could tell. It had not come from training. It had come from impact. From the brutal clarity that arrives when a person can no longer pretend their instincts are neutral. Marcus nodded once. "That is closer," he said. Not praise. Not absolution. Just acknowledgement. Ethan's throat moved as he tried to steady himself. "I cannot take back what I did." "No," Marcus replied. "You cannot." The words were gentle, but they carried no softness that could be mistaken for escape. And that is why what happens after this matters. Ethan stood still, listening now in a way he had not listened to anyone all evening. Marcus set one hand on the handle of his worn bag and let his eyes drift briefly across the lobby, over the marble, the brass, the expensive quiet, the beauty of a place built to make people feel valued. Then he looked back at Ethan. "A hotel is not only judged by thread count and lighting and service speed," he said. "It is judged by whether the people inside it know how to recognize humanity before hierarchy. Tonight, this building failed that test." The words landed softly, but Naomi felt them all the way down. She thought of every guest who had walked through those doors hoping not just for comfort, but for ease, for safety, for the relief of not having to measure themselves against suspicion in a room they were paying to enter. Marcus turned slightly toward Naomi. "You tried to speak when it would have been easier not to. That matters too." Her lips parted, and she blinked quickly against the sudden sting in her eyes. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice almost a whisper. Marcus shook his head once. "Do not thank me for noticing courage," he said. "Just keep it." Naomi held herself a little straighter after that. Even David seemed to register the shift. This was no longer only a confrontation. It was becoming a line drawn through the culture of the room itself, revealing who had protected comfort and who had protected truth. Ethan followed Marcus's gaze toward Naomi, and the shame in his face deepened in a way that finally felt clean. Less panic now. More recognition. "I silenced her," he said quietly. "Yes," Marcus answered. "You did." Ethan nodded, accepting it without argument. The movement was small, but everyone saw it. It was the first time that evening he had stopped bargaining with reality. David stepped closer, tablet still in hand, his executive composure restored, but altered now by something more sober. "The board is prepared to begin whenever you wish," he said to Marcus. Marcus looked at him, then back at Ethan. "There will be a meeting," he said, "but not the one anyone expected." David understood immediately. So did Raymond. Naomi did not yet know what shape those words would take, but she felt something in them shift the future of the building. Marcus continued. "Tonight is no longer about performance metrics and quarterly optics. It is about culture. hiring, escalation, complaint review, training that teaches language without confronting bias. And every property under this brand will be part of that conversation. Ethan closed his eyes for 1 second, not in resistance now, but in acceptance of the cost. When he opened them, he seemed to have stepped out of the last of his defensiveness. "I understand," he said. Marcus studied him carefully. "Do you?" The question was not sharp. It was searching. Ethan took a breath and looked around the lobby as if seeing it for the first time, not as a kingdom to manage, but as a place full of strangers whose dignity could be harmed or protected by a single decision at a front desk. "I understand enough to know this was not about one mistake tonight," he said. "It was about what I have allowed myself to think without examining it." Marcus held his gaze a moment longer, then nodded once. Outside, a siren moved somewhere far down the avenue, muted by rain and distance, never coming here after all. The sound passed like a ghost of what might have happened if truth had not arrived in time. Marcus picked up his leather bag. "You are right about one more thing," he said. Ethan looked up, wary but listening. "You cannot take it back." Marcus paused, the chandelier light catching the rain-dark edge of his coat. "But you can decide whether this becomes the moment you started changing, or just the moment you got caught." No one in the lobby moved after that. The words settled into the marble and brass and glass like something permanent. Ethan lowered his head, not for show, not to perform remorse for the room, but because there was finally nothing left to protect except whatever honesty he still had the courage to keep. And for the first time that night, Marcus did not see a manager, or an obstacle, or even an offender. He saw a man standing at the narrow edge between disgrace and growth, and he left the next step entirely up to him. Marcus Ellington lifted his bag and, without another word, started toward the private elevator. The lobby did not move with him right away. It simply watched, as if the room itself needed a second to understand that power had just passed through it without needing to raise its voice. The marble floor caught the reflection of his dark coat and the chandelier above him, gold light folding across rainwater still drying at his shoulders. David Whitmore stepped beside him with the quiet urgency of a man who knew the evening had already changed course. Naomi Brooks moved from behind the desk only after Marcus had gone several steps, her hands still trembling, though less from fear now than from the shock of having been seen. Raymond Pike remained where he was, one hand resting lightly at his side, no longer guarding the lobby from a threat, but standing in the aftermath of a truth too large to be escorted away. Behind the front desk, Ethan Caldwell did not follow. He could not. He stood beneath the warm lights of the place he had once controlled so effortlessly, and for the first time since he had taken the position, the polished quiet of the Halston Grand did not feel like prestige. It felt like judgment. Marcus stopped before the elevator doors and turned, not dramatically, not to reclaim the room, but because some endings needed witness. He looked at Naomi first. "Tomorrow morning," he said, his voice low and steady, "you will meet with human resources and with Mr. Whitmore. You will tell them exactly what happened, start to finish. No editing. No softening. No protecting anyone from the truth." Naomi nodded, her throat tight. "Yes, sir," she said. Marcus held her gaze for one brief moment longer. "And after that, I want you in the management development program." The words reached her like light through storm glass. She blinked, stunned. Ethan's head lifted sharply at that, but Marcus had already turned to David. "Effective tonight, every complaint involving differential treatment at this property goes to my office for direct review. Pull 6 months of guest incidents, staff notes, and desk escalations. Not summaries. Full records." David nodded once. "Done." The elevator doors remained closed behind Marcus, quiet and waiting. He finally looked at Ethan. There was no anger left in his face now. That was what made the moment so difficult to bear. Anger would have offered Ethan something to resist. This offered only truth. "You do not need to say anything else tonight," Marcus said. Ethan's lips parted anyway, but no words came. The apology he had wanted to build had nowhere strong enough to stand. Marcus gave the smallest nod, not of forgiveness exactly, but of recognition that the real verdict would not come from this lobby. It would come from what Ethan chose when no one was forcing him to choose. "Whether you remain in this company is not the first question," Marcus continued. "Whether you understand what happened here is." Ethan lowered his eyes. The lobby was so quiet now that the distant hum of the ventilation system sounded almost like wind moving through an empty house. Outside, the rain had softened. The city beyond the windows shimmered in blurred red and white, as if Chicago itself had been washed and left glowing in the dark. "I understand enough to be ashamed," Ethan said at last. The sentence was small, but it was real. Marcus studied him for a second, then answered with the same calm that had unsettled the room from the moment he arrived. "That is a beginning," he said. "Do not confuse it with the end." Then the elevator doors opened with a soft mechanical hush. Warm light spilled around Marcus and David as they stepped inside. Just before the doors closed, Marcus glanced once more across the lobby. Naomi stood straighter than she had an hour earlier. Raymond remained still, thoughtful, changed in the quiet way decent men change when they have witnessed something they will not forget. Ethan stood behind the desk, no longer hidden by posture or title or polished language, just a man alone with the shape of himself. Then the door slid shut. The piano continued somewhere near the bar, gentle and unhurried. A guest rolled a suitcase across the marble. Someone at the entrance shook rain from an umbrella. Life resumed, but not as it had been. At the front desk, Ethan looked down and saw the canceled call log still glowing on the monitor beside Marcus's untouched reservation. His own reflection floated faintly in the black edge of the screen, pale and distorted. For a long moment he did not touch anything. He only stood there under the chandelier, listening to the silence left behind by a man who had walked through humiliation without surrendering dignity, and through power without using cruelty. Naomi returned slowly to her station, but the space between them had changed forever. She no longer looked at Ethan with the nervous deference of a junior employee. She looked at him the way people look at someone after illusion has broken. Not hateful, clear. Ethan felt that clarity more deeply than any reprimand. Beyond the desk, the gold company crest near the ballroom corridor still gleamed above the family name he had failed to honor until it was impossible not to. Beautiful places do not make beautiful people. They reveal them. And in the softened hush of the lobby, with rain fading on the windows and the night settling gently over the city, the Halston Grand seemed to breathe differently at last. Not cleaner. Not yet. But honest. And sometimes honesty is the first light that reaches a room before redemption ever does.